The community concerns are valid. There is definitely like extraction, right? But it's easily around 2 million, could be more. They're on a streak, right? They did MELANIA, ENRON, LIBRA. I would call it corporate grifting. It's like stealing. Come on, dude. Like, are you kidding? Like, it's crime season. So we brought it upon ourselves. I don't even think that Kelsier is an exception.
GM, and welcome back to SolanaFloor. If you have been following the recent string of meme coin disasters and the sniping scandals and the insider trading, then you've definitely heard of the name Kelsier Ventures. From Libra to Enron and now Mates, it's the same people that keep showing up, and they're leaving behind a trail of destruction, of broken promises, and of course, stolen funds. So last week we published a documentary-style investigation into Hayden Davis and the Kelsier team, and you should absolutely check that out if you haven't already done so. There's some wild revelations in there about his family's origins. But today, I'm joined by Ahad. He's the founder of Mates, who, like many other people, believes his project was used and even manipulated by Hayden Davis and the Kelsier team. Now, there's $350,000 in missing funds, countless red flags that appeared right after the project launched, and we're here to piece together what exactly happened, who profited, who Mates was ever given a fair shot. It's probably been quite a stressful roller coaster of a few weeks. So maybe we begin with, how are you? How are you feeling?
To be very honest, surprisingly, I am feeling not that bad. Of course, there's a bit of disappointment, there's a bit of sadness, but at no point in time I felt paralyzed. Like I was like, okay, things have happened. What are the next steps, right? So, and luckily enough, I got the right support, like my team, my co founder. And some of our community members and investors as well were surprisingly very, very open minded. Like I would have not expected that, and I'm really, really thankful to them. Of course, that does not apply to everybody. Some people are rightfully angry, disappointed. I get all of those emotions, right? But one thing I do feel proud of is that at no point in time we felt like that, it's like it's the end of the world, right? So it was like, okay, shit has hit the fan, but we still gotta, get up and fight. So yeah, and I got a lot of support from family as well and everything. So I'm feeling good.
We are gonna get on to bringing some clarity around the Mates launch and the involvement of Hayden and Kelsier Ventures, of course. Was there ever over the last couple weeks a point where you thought, "Fuck, this is potentially the end of it. Things are really, really catastrophic." Was there a low point in the last 2 weeks?
Yeah, actually, the lowest point was it was a combination of things which happened to us. For context, for anyone who's watching this, we actually had a running product, a Web2 product. We had, millions of users. It was one of the most advanced, I would say, like AI platform, which we were extending it into, like making it into an AI launchpad plus an AI app store, right? Like that's what we were working on. And as part of that, we did a token launch on the 14th of January. And just 5 or 6 days into it, Trump launched. And if you remember that, like when Trump launched, there was a movement of liquidity from like everything else to Trump. So we were like part of that. And then right after Trump, if you remember, the market started slowing down, right? Like all of a sudden, like lots of projects were hurt, started bleeding. We were affected a little bit by it as well. And then, around the 4th of February, we find out that like our website is not working. And we're like, okay, what's going on? We check up everything and we find out that like our domain, like if you go in on like a domain registry, we found out it has been put on server hold. And we're like, okay, what's going on? So we had actually gotten this domain from Google, but Google had sold its domain business to Squarespace. So we immediately reached out to Squarespace. They did not give us a response. I believe it was like 5 to 6 days. And then we got a response that like our domain registry has been put on hold by our registrar, by the domain registrar, because of explicit user generated content. And that was like, for me, it was like, what? Like imagine like Reddit, right? I mean, Reddit has like everything, right? Imagine like the domain registrar decides to like rug pull Reddit. At the same time, I was like, okay, maybe this is the world we are trying to build through crypto, right? Like a decentralized world where like centralized intermediaries cannot just pull the plug on you. right? So that was the lowest point for me. And at that time, the literally like the token crashed, was further crashing for 1 or 2 days. I was like, what is happening? Like this is just insane.
Like
And
bizarre time to be alive. Yeah, really.
yeah, it was like, I said, okay, I'm going to accept that reality, and which means that we have to rebuild everything. Second thing is that like either we can spend our time resurrecting the current product on a new domain, which is also not easy because we would have lost the existing community. So we were like, okay, hard decisions need to be made. We tightened our burn rate, we cut down costs, we had to make some hard decisions. We laid off some of our team members as well when we decided that we're going to focus on the next product, which is like sort of like rugpull, which is like the next iteration of this. And I just accepted it as that the token needs to be like rebuilt from the ground up, right?
Yeah, that makes sense. I'm gonna sort of hop in there on something you mentioned a second ago when we're talking about the domain being taken down. Obviously, it's not a very common occurrence. You sort of said we got rugged by the domain registrar, which yeah, funny. But I want to also tie that into some of the community concerns and sort of give you the opportunity to address them directly. A lot of people are saying that when the website went down, they felt like they had been rugged by you guys. So what's your response to that?
So the response is that, like, first of all, as I said, right, like we were waiting for a response from Squarespace, which took 5 days to come back, right? So it was like literally what to do, right? And then after that, when we got to know, it was like, I think we got a response on like a Sunday. And like at that time, we were like having this internal discussion as to like, what are we doing? Like, are we going to like resurrect it? Are we just going to focus our energies on the next one? So it took us like 1 to 2 days to like come to that decision as well, because it was a major decision, right? Like, and I don't think we could have made it very quickly. So I think the community concerns are valid in the sense that like our communication could have been better. Like looking back, and especially like right now, I'm very inspired by, like, for example, how Ben from Bybit like dealt with everything, right? Like I think that was very inspiring, and I think that's what I should have done, is that like just got on our live stream and like just tell people that, like, guys, this is what has happened. We're also trying to figure out the situation, right? So this is where I would accept my own shortcomings. So that is where we could have done better job on communication. But I'm not trying to defend myself or us, but what happened was that we were actually doing this communication more proactively with the user community, I would say, which is present more on like Discord, etc.
I want to sort of go back in time a little bit, leading up to the launch itself. Can you walk me through the weeks or months, however long it was that you were in communication with Kelsier Ventures? Leading up to that launch, when did you first meet them? When did you first start working with and talking to Hayden from Kelsier Ventures? And yeah, what were the main sort of milestones and steps leading up to that launch?
Our launch was supposed, I mean, we did it in collaboration with BorgPad, which is a launch pad, and it was supposed to be an LBP. We really did like a small raise, and we just took all of the liquidity and we seeded the plan was to like seed the liquidity pool, right? The plan was to be Dex first, because I personally have been like in conversations with like many centralized exchanges, and I just feel like to the ethos of like, I think like Dex first is the right way, because the intermediaries, they just like the fees, like all of these things are just like ridiculous in some cases, right? At least like what was being offered to us. And as part of the launch, towards the end of the launch, it always happens that like people start making some introductions to you, that like, oh, you can have some like angel investors, or like who can help you in terms of like distribution, like all of those things, right? So the launch was around 14th of January. And, at that time, we were actually introduced to KOL, who's a KOL in Latam, I believe, through one of our investors.
Do you have the name of the KOL?
Yeah, his name is, I mean, I don't know if I'm saying it right or not, but like, I think it's called Kemanus, right? So that's the KOL who was introduced. And basically his manager, I believe, is as Ariel. His manager Ariel introduced us to Kelsier. One important thing to note here is that I was not looking for any market makers, because we were Dex first. It did not make sense to have a market maker, because we're not looking for like depth of liquidity or any such thing, right? Secondly, I've talked to a couple of market makers, and after that, the decision was to not to go with any market makers. Ventures, right? So Ariel actually introduced me to Kelsier, and he said that like he actually nudged me a bit in the sense that like anything Solana related, these guys are the go-to guys, right? Now, I just want to be a bit like I want to like separate fact from conjecture, right? I have no reasons to believe of any like wrong intentions at Ariel's end, because I have spoken to him many times since, and he said that like these guys were involved with the M3 launch, right? Like later on, that's what he said, right? So he had also like, anyways, let me follow it chronologically. So he introduces me to Kelsier. He nudges me a bit as well to like talk to them. I have a call. Now, I'm not exactly sure of the timeline of the events, but it's like 2 to 3 days before my launch, like very close to the launch.
And the call was with the entire Kelsier team, or was Ariel there as well as the sort of as the connection point, or who was on that call?
So my first few conversations happened just with Thomas from the Kelsier team, right? Like the
And that's
first.
that Dr. Tom, the Dr. Tom
No,
Davis.
it's Thomas, who is I think is part of the org chart. Thomas Hori, who's the VP. So I spoke to him, and to be very honest, in the first two conversations, I liked what I heard from them because like the pitch was not of a traditional market maker, right? Like it was that like, okay, we are your launch partners. We will help you on the market making, but we also help in terms of like marketing, bringing in liquid funds. We have an extensive network within Solana ecosystem. I did some validations of it, like through like for example the X profile, like who's interacting with the X profile, like those kind of things, right? But the more important thing is that like I did more thorough review with Ariel. I specifically asked them, can these guys be trusted, right? Like, can these guys be trusted with the tokens? And the response was that like yes, they can be trusted. I have met these guys. I have met like both the brothers and the father. They are a good Christian family, something like that. I was like, okay, looks like that there's something there, right? And the pitch was like rock solid. It was like, we're not just like we are your partners. We'll make sure to like provide like the support levels, like those kind of things. So I was like, okay, makes sense. Now this was like really like leading into the launch, and at this time basically the launch happened, and by that time we have not engaged with them, right? Like the launch happened, we were actually supposed to engage with them at that time. But what happened was that, I mean, we are in talks with them, and I'm telling them that, like, guys, we really need to expedite this because, the LBP had happened, and, we had set the tokens up in Magna for like, unlocks and everything, right? So it's like, if you're familiar with Magna, it's like a vesting platform. The way it works is that like you have to set it up, and, you set up like a time for it, and, the tokens just start getting unlocked at that time, right? So like the tokens got unlocked, and I think somebody got some of the tokens. They created like a small liquidity pool, and the trading began, right? So at that time we really had to go and like seed the liquidity pool, which was done with the Borgpad team. And that's when the Kelsier guys got like, because we are still like in talks with them, right? So they got on a call with me, and that's where Thomas was on the call, Hayden was on the call, Gideon was on the call. Like these three guys were on the call. And it was like a bit like, oh guys, like the launch has already happened. Like we really have to like rush this, otherwise it's screwed. So at that time we were still like talking about the agreement. They had sent me the agreement. They're like, guys, like you could trust us or whatever, right? Like just like send us the tokens and the market making capital. So we send them the token percentage and the market making capital. I've shared all of these details already.
Yeah, and just for the audience here, sorry, someone might not have seen that post. The amount of tokens that was shared with them, was it 4%? Am I remembering that correctly?
We send the 4% of the tokens.
And the dollar equivalent of that is roughly, or was roughly 350,000 US dollars. Is that accurate?
No, we send them 4% of the tokens, and we send them 350,000 USD because I did not want to have any market making agreement like a loan option agreement. I wanted to have an agreement in which the tokens belong to us, right? Because that's an important thing. So we're giving our own capital. So we gave our own capital, like 350,000, 4% of the tokens. And yeah, basically that's what we talked about in terms of like the agreement. They sent us the agreement in which, like, I think the breakup was roughly around, like, like 2% for market making, 1% for like providing depth of liquidity, which, I mean, to be honest, doesn't make sense. I think both are the same thing. And then, like 1% for like marketing, right? Like, and like in marketing, they said like very specifically at that time that, like, they'll share us like proofs or whatever happens in terms of like who they engage. They use a very specific word, whisper campaigns, right? Like whisper campaigns, whale groups.
What exactly do you think they meant by whisper campaigns? And the reason why I'm asking that is there's been a lot of like, whispers, for lack of a better word, that there's a lot of insider trading going on anyway. But then specifically with these launches that were linked to Kelsier Ventures, there's a lot of chatter about insider trading and people getting contract addresses. So is that what they meant?
I mean, like now, I think probably that's what they meant. But I mean, in our case, I think they really did not do anything. My understanding of whisper campaign at that time was that, like, a marketing is you do like a broadcast, right? Like a Twitter post. That's the broadcast marketing, right? My understanding of whisper campaigns was like, the final push, right? Like, which is there, like, which could be there in, like, telegram chats, where you're creating like that end level awareness, right? Like where people know that, like, this thing. And see, like in our case, it wasn't a pump fund launch. We were very public about the launch, so there's not really like an insider kind of a thing. It's mostly like awareness, right? Like, so that people know about the launch, and they can come and participate. That's what it was, right? And that's what it was told as well. And the other thing, it was that, like, it's about marketing to the right groups, right? Like whale groups, right? Like liquid funds, right? Like people who have capital, or who are, like, participating in it, like with bigger size, right? So that is what it was, like the composition of the deal. So the launch had already happened. Remember, I told you the launch had already happened. And at that time, they told me that, like, since the launch had already happened, as part of this, to run the strategy which they want to run, they have to like bring down the chart first. I was like, okay, that does not make sense, but okay, you guys do your thing. Seems like you're doing, So if you look at our chart, you will see that there was a spike, and then, like, it basically like came down, and then it goes up. Now I think that, like, the reason to probably bring it down is so that, they can get in at like lower levels, right? That is the only explanation, right? Like, otherwise, I don't know. But at that time, it was told to me that, like, it's already too high, it's not sustainable. You wouldn't have like buyers at that time.
Can I ask how did they say they were going to exert downwards pressure on the price? Did they say we are going to start dumping tokens, or yeah, how do you artificially deflate the price to make it more attractive?
Well, probably that's what they did, right? Like they sold, right? Like that's probably what happens. But that's okay. I mean, that's happened in like any sort of like market making or whatever. I mean, I don't know if it's okay or not, but like, that's what I was told, right? And then, like, the launch happened, and then after the launch, and I started like, asking them like, okay, can you guys like, acknowledge the receipt of the tokens? And at that time, they started being a bit non-responsive. And secondly, I had a conversation with Thomas in which they said it went well, and like now, like, to support the project, what we can do is that, like, we actually did not use your capital, so you can have the 350K back. And now, we're just going to keep like the tokens, and we're going to use it to like, support the project. I was like, what? But that's not what we talked about. Like, the agreement was simple, that, like, these tokens belong to me, other than that marketing one, which was supposed to be spent, that 1%. The 3% basically belonged to us, and then there was a profit sharing, right? Like a 70-30 kind of, or 80-20, that kind of thing, which is like typical market making agreements. So I started pressing these guys. I started talking to like Ariel, and I said that, like, guys, like, started having some red flags, right? So that's when I started making some forceful demands, and you can say like some sort of like, if these guys like are trying to do anything shady, then I'm gonna go like public with it or whatever. And this is like 1 or 2 days after launch, right? I'm still not getting any response. I think my launch was around Wednesday. I remember that around weekend, Thomas and I am talking, and like, his tone just changed. Like, he was acting as if like, oh, we were trying to support your project. Now we don't know, your behavior. This is like, I'm like, what is wrong with my behavior, guys? Like I trusted you guys. I sent you, and right now I'm asking you to acknowledge it. I'm asking you to like sign the agreement, and you guys are like delaying it, right? Like, so, like, there's nothing wrong with my behavior. There's everything wrong with your behavior, right?
Quick question here. Is this sort of just to put things into the timeline? There was a screenshot of a private conversation with Hayden that went viral where he's basically saying, fellas, we're trying to max extract from this one. In terms of that timeline, that message was sent by Hayden, I guess, a couple of days after the launch, and this is also when the red flags first started appearing for you.
The red flags appeared right after the launch, like 1 day or 2 days after the launch. Like Thomas is basically telling me the agreement which we talked about does not hold and you just give me the tokens. And I'm like asking them to stick to the agreement, sign the agreement. And he's telling me, oh, the founders are busy. So that's what I'm being told, right? So that's where the red flag started coming in for me. Is it you need to stick to your word, right? Like that's what we talked about. And then basically I started pressing through Ariel spoke, and I get a bit of message from Gideon, which is like, seems like you've been like threatening us or whatever. We don't take threats lightly, something like that. And I'm like, dude, I'm not threatening anyone, I'm just asking for a simple acknowledgement. The rest can wait. So he acknowledged that, okay, yes, we have received the tokens. 4% is with us, 350K is with us. He said, we're not going anywhere. Now I started once again pressuring them for the same agreement. Then all of a sudden I get a message from Hayden, which is like a bit of a rude message. Is like, and he says like, oh, we are a multi 9-figure firm or whatever. If you don't want to work with us, let us know. And then is like, stop all of these side conversations, like have the conversation in this chat. And I try to have this conversation in the chat, and then Thomas just takes the conversation in DMs with me, because every business dealing is happening with Thomas. So it was like a little like a psyop going on, right? So I once again I talked to Ariel, and Ariel told me that I think you're just being a bit worked up. This is just a business negotiation. Treat it as business negotiation. These guys have been busy, and this is the weekend of the Trump launch and Melania launch, and I'm told that they're busy doing bigger launches. I said, you might be doing bigger launches, but for me, my project is important, right? After that, with Thomas, once again, this is where my memory might not be 100% correct, and I don't want to be factually inaccurate, but I would be directionally correct about everything I say. And basically the sequence of events was that I asked them for can you share me your report, right? Like what's going on, oh, you'll get a report, right? I never got a report. And after that basically he comes up and he said oh, I'll send you the agreement. I said, okay, fine, I'll accept your new agreement, but let's go through that agreement. So he sends me a new agreement in which they give me vague deliverables, in which basically there was that 4% tokens is theirs, and for that they'll support the project. And I start asking them pointed questions that can you tell me, because I said to support the project you don't need tokens, you need soul. So I'm like, can you tell me the extra capital which you're bringing in? Can you tell me which liquid funds are being involved, right? Can you tell me, for example, the 1% marketing, right? Can you share screenshots with me, right? If you have done it in Telegram group or whatever, right? Oh, we cannot share that, that's our trade secret. So that is when the red flag started accumulating. And yeah, there were many things, right? So at that point I was like, okay, I need to further escalate this, right? Julian from Kip Protocol, he's actually a small angel investor in our project, so I knew him. And at that time I saw the post of Milei and Hayden, and I had seen such a similar post of Julian as well. So when I tried to put two and two together, and I reached out to Julian as do you know these guys? I said, oh, I don't know them, but I actually met them in Argentina once. So I said, okay, I'm going to pull you in and I told him about the situation. I told him everything about the situation. He said, let me try to speak to them that what's going on. So I added him to that Telegram chat. He left a good message. They didn't respond to him. And then after that, Julian was like, I tried, seems like they're treating me the same way they're treating you. So at that time, eventually the sequence of events was that I was sort of being pushed into a corner, right? And I was like, okay, let's try to, and Thomas was like, we were doing good until everything was fine, but now and my token is crashing, right? Oh, there's one interesting thing also happened is that one day there's if you look at the chart, I think around 27 there's a big dump. So there is a dump which happens, and at that time in that group out of nowhere Thomas just messages and said there's been some suspicious activity happening with mates I tried to reach out. I was actually sleeping at that time, and it seemed like somebody's trying to like hurt your project. I was like, you're asking me, you're the market maker, you're supposed to have all of the tools, you're supposed to tell me what's happening, right? Like, who is it, right? As I anyways like did the simple analysis I could, and I told him that, like, this doesn't look like somebody who is an insider, because that's what we could see. It was somebody who had like actually bought from the market, right? I haven't like revisited it, but I think if we do like a careful scan, it might be possible it was just them, right? Like they might be like linked wallets or whatever, right? So like these kind of red flags were just like they just kept piling up. I even like pushed not just through Ariel, but even through K Manus, that like, and I got to know that, like, K Manus is like more of a partner with them. I even asked him to like help me out, and he said he will speak to them. So I'm talking to Ariel, I'm talking to Julian, I'm talking to K Manus, right? And at one point in time, I was like, okay, let's see. You like, and I speak to Thomas, and he tells me that, like, until we were working with you, things were fine, but like now we're not, like, but like, just agree to that new agreement, and like your chart will get better or whatever, like, something like that. I said, okay, like, show me some stuff, right? Like, show me like some movement on this.
Hold up there for a second. They sent you a message saying there's suspicious activity on the chart. We're seeing a bit of a dump, and we can fix that for you.
No, no, they didn't say that they can fix that. They just said that, like, there's suspicious activity.
I wanted to sort of touch on this point a little bit more because there's been so much chatter around insider trading, around KOLs getting the contract address before launch. And I know that you said this isn't necessarily a discussion that applies as much to the Mates launch as it does to some of these other high profile launches like the Melania, Trump, Libra, so on and so forth. But we are trying to understand, and I think the community really wants to know as well, to what extent do you think Kelsier Ventures and Hayden and all these guys had a network or a team of KOLs or insiders that they were sharing information with behind closed doors such that they could profit from these launches? To what extent do you believe that is the case, and who are these KOLs and insiders? Do we know?
I mean, I would like to be factual. I think for my project, they did nothing. I wish they would have, like, talked to some KOLs or some insiders or whatever, right? I think they didn't do anything, like, and that's what you saw in the text message as well, right? They're just trying to max extract, right? Like with me having like no visibility, no report, not even like a single penny returned to us or whatever, right? Interestingly, this is where I was going, is that, like, eventually, like, where we were, right? So I was with like Thomas, and then Thomas was like, I actually had like a bit of like food poisoning. Let's get like now back on track. You agree with this like new agreement. And that's at the time was created a working group. So in the working group, I saw there were some KOLs who were present. The never working group never worked anything, because, like, I think the working group was created, and then we ran into like the domain issue, and I was like still like involved with that, and then Libra happened. When Libra happened, I was plugged into it, and I think I saw like the first statement from Kiev, in which when he's, I think, first statement in which they said like, we are not the right? Like Kelsier is, that's where like my red flag went up. And I even messaged Julian. I said, like, why did you work with them if we already knew about the shady activities, right? Like, why did you work with them? And he messaged, and he said, like, I didn't know they were involved. I don't know, like, something like that. Like, that was the exchange. So until then, I was still trying to resolve it in like a business negotiation, right? Because my thought process was that, like, these guys, if they're involved in these like bigger launches and everything, it does not make sense for them to like have this big reputational risk over a relatively smaller project like us, right? But when I saw Libra, I realized that there is a pattern, and at that time I went into that group, and I was like, no more side conversations. Like, I want an exact report of what happened with my token. I want to know where's my money. You've been telling me that like the 350K will be returned to me. We have never used it. Why have it not been given to me for a month? Why has like not a single report been shared? And then at that time I was told, oh, you will have everything by Monday, right? So like, I think it's like happening Saturday night, Sunday morning. It's like, you'll have everything by Monday. I follow up again, and I'm angry, I'm furious, right? And I'm also thinking, I can see if they're like suspicious activity, and it's like pretty clear, right, of what's happening. And I can also see that, like, the intermediaries I was asking to help are sort of also involved with them in like different ways, right? So I start giving them ultimatums, right? That, like, okay, you do this, otherwise, I have no other option, but I have to just go. And I'm still told that, like, you're gonna have this everything by end of day. You're gonna have a report by end of day. You'll have your funds by end of day. I don't believe it. And, like, Ariel is like still telling me that, like, oh, you're like being too aggressive with them. If they say they'll have by end of day, you'll have by end. I'm like, are you kidding me? They've been saying this for a month. I have all the right in the world to be upset. And just like before the end of day, the DeFi tuna, I believe you guys conducted that interview, but like that message came out, right? Like that trying to like the max extract one. And somebody messaged me on Telegram, is that like, what is this? And somebody messaged me, did you guys hire like these guys as and like, a friend? And I saw that message, and that was a time when I was like enraged. Like, I saw that message, and I was like, like all of my suspicions of like the previous month, because, like, I mean, I could sense something is going wrong, but you still don't have a proof of it. And I see that, and I'm like, by the way, at that time as well, when I was like just a day before, when I'm like going very like forceful with Thomas, he's still psyoping me. He's telling me, oh, I've only tried to help you, we helped you with the launch, the launch was successful. I'm like, no. And even then I told him, like, no, you never helped me. We pumped right out of the gate, even before you guys were involved. So, like, don't take the credit for it. And secondly, like, after that, when there was another pump, was also when we did a marketing activation of it. And they're doing this, and I send that message in the group, right? Like, seems like the cat is out of the bag. And then Hayden comes with a response, and he says that, like, this message was at the time we did an analysis, and there were some like red flags. So like, he sends me a doc file which I couldn't open because I don't have the access to it, but it says something about it, that found a previous scam or whatever. And then he says that, like, when coffee starts going through this, he'll find that we actually re-injected the capital, and he'll find other things as well. And I'm like, dude, nobody forced you to work with me, like something like that. Like, if you had concern, then why were you working with me?
So just to sort of get some clarity on that, Hayden was after the launch, after the Mates launch, he was insisting that CoffeeZilla would find evidence to suggest that Hayden was innocent.
In this Mates thing. Now, this is like interesting bit, right? Like, he says this, and then I ask him, are you serious? I have not even been shared a single report. And he said, oh, I don't know that. And he says, like, where are the funds, right? And he says, like, yes, you are owed funds, 100%, 110%, something like that. He says that, like, hey, you are owed funds, right? And I said, okay, then send me. And after that, these guys just went dark.
They still have your money?
They still have my money. I still don't have a single report from them.
Do you have any idea as to where in the world they may be financially, how they may be doing?
I want to keep like fact away from conjecture, but I just want to tell you this one thing though. The last message to me, in which I even like, tag Dr. Tom, who's in that group, is that, like, guys, you have bigger problems to deal with. I mean, of course, like, you have, tanked the price. I mean, I'm not even coming after the fact that, like, if you have like dumped the tokens and the market cap, because we never talked about it, right? And I'll actually come to that point because there's an important point. But before that, like, my last message to them was, you have bigger problems to deal with. Give me back my funds, and I won't pursue this. But if not, I have no other option, because I'm accountable. It is my responsibility to the project. It's not just my money. Like, it doesn't work that way. It's not like, like random, like, it's not a meme coin that, like, you just like went on pump fun, and like. And that is, by the way, which is what I wanted to come back to. My whole time I was negotiating with Thomas, I was telling him the same thing, that you can't just take 3-4% of the supply, because every token is accounted for. We have a published tokenomics. That was my conversation with him. And when they were pushing me that new contract and forcing me to like accept it, I was really like telling them that, guys, no liquidations. And I was even like saying, like, very specifically that, like, no liquidations, not even like a fancy way of liquidation, which I even specified, no single sided LPs, which is basically selling, right? Like, I mean, We know that, right? So like they had no mandate to do it. So that's what I was telling them in my last messages, that like if you guys had sold, then I want to see a proof that you have bought at levels, right? But now we have actually done the report, and we could see that there is definitely like extraction, right? Like there's definitely like, which is, a lot of money which has been made, right? Like, I mean, I don't want to say an exact number until I have like the specifics, because as I said, I want to keep like fact from conjecture. But it's like, easily around 2 million, could be more, much more, right?
That is a rough estimate of how much Kelsier Ventures made from the Mates launch or
Yes.
extracted.
Yes. More.
2 million
Yes. More.
plus the
And
350,000 of your funds that they
yes.
still have.
Yes, around that, right? So once again, I want to keep like, I'm not saying that like this is 100% sure, because like, the third party has mentioned in their report that like it's a bit difficult to like, because there are like too many bots involved and everything. And I didn't want, we will do like a more extensive one. I'll work with some others as well, but like this is the initial assessment. Now you asked the question is like to who was involved, etc. So I can tell you this one thing is that like when I was going through this, right, like this conflict with them, my first concern was them, which started happening, was that like, are these guys even legit? Like, have I made a mistake of like, sending it to like, a team which will just like run away? So at that time, I started doing a due diligence on them. And, I was also trying to like find people who can mediate the conversation. So what I did see is that like these guys, they definitely had interactions with like, some top people in the Solana ecosystem, right? Like whether they're KOLs, whether they're like, in some cases founders, just like we found out that like Meteor's founder, Ben, also, knew them. So they had some sort of legitimacy, right? Like that's why I even mentioned earlier on that I have no reason to believe that like, Ariel was in on it, because he's probably like, duped as well. And like that's what he has told me as well. Like, he tried to like resolve the conversation like the whole time, right? So the answer to your question is that like I can tell you from my own experience is that like three things. The first thing is that they clearly did not act as people who wanted to be like long-term participants in the ecosystem. Because see, if they thought about that, then their reputation would have been extremely important, right? And at no point in time they acted with like, integrity with me, right? So like the first one is integrity. The second one is, I would say, maturity. Even the way they were dealing it, it wasn't like very mature, in the sense that like I don't know what they expected. Like, did they not expect that like I would not go public with it? Like, why would I not? I just don't understand, right? Like, what was the expectation, right? And the third way is professionalism, right? Like the fact that like they never sent a report, they never acted like that they were like legit market makers. That's what I can comment on, right? Like, but once again, that's my experience. Now, some conjectures I have. I don't think that they were like this with every project. I'm pretty sure that with some projects they were actually partners, right? Like I don't think that like, and with partners maybe they were trying to like extract retail together or whatever, right? Like that's different, right? But I think by the time of my case, once again, my conjecture is they just started thinking that they were invincible. They were on a streak, right? Like they did like Melania, they supposedly they did Enron, they did Libra, right? So I think that's what started happening.
Two questions on that, just very, very briefly. So, firstly, on a personal note, do you feel rugged or scammed or, yeah, sort of lied to by Hayden and Kelsier Ventures?
100% from the get-go, right? Like, I mean, that's exactly what it was. I mean, I would call it like corporate grifting, right? Like that's what was happening, right? Like it was like a corporate sort of like psyop going on. But basically, like, I mean, if I think about it, it is that like it's a fact. It's like stealing. There is no other way, right? Like because to this date, like it's stealing. It's not acting like a partner. I mean, in my sense, I would say that yeah, there's I have no doubt about it, right? But I think one thing which I did not cover is that like when that working group was made, that's where I once again I saw that like some legitimate people from like the Solana ecosystem were part of it. I don't want to name names right now specifically with this, but they were like legitimate people associated with them, right? Now, have were they also duped into it? Were they in on it? I don't know. if you had heard like this recent, if you have seen the recent video with Jake he did, in which he says that like, I have no association with Hayden, he just met me, and then he's just like gave me a stay at like Four Seasons, or like got a car to pick me up. Like, come on, dude, like, are you kidding? Like, nobody's given me a stay at Four Seasons. I mean, like, these guys think we are still stupid.
Do you think Jakey was involved based on that video? Do you have any reason to believe that, he was either, part of the scam, or he himself was scammed by Hayden Kelsier?
I don't know, but like this particular statement, which I wanted to point out, is ridiculous. It is undefensible, and that's public. Like, it is just like, I got like a stay at Four Seasons, and like, and but yeah, I have no relationship with them.
I mean, listen, if he was a politician saying, I didn't take a bribe, all I did was get picked up in a private car and stay in a Four Seasons, you'd probably be out of a job pretty quickly, and you would not be a elected representative forever, I would imagine. It's a little bit different in crypto.
Four Seasons. It wasn't like that he got me a drink, right? Like, you're talking about a stay at Four Seasons in a country where Hayden was not even present, right? Like, come on. Like, I think these are the things which, if we start like finding the trail off, my personal experience is that whenever you see practices like this, that's where there's always shady behavior. I personally believe that like you only do it with the money which is like not yours, because if it's your money you don't do that kind of thing. I quote tweeted it, and my tweet was that like, I'm in this and I don't like it.
There's that, but specific to the Jakey video and the KOLs and this sort of argument that there was a quid pro quo, I want to know, to what extent do you think that the KOLs that were involved with Hayden and Kelsier Ventures and all these token launches, whether it's the MELANIA, the Trump, the LIBRA token, the ENRON token, to what extent do you think they were implicated criminally? And I don't mean in terms of losing face to the community. I mean in terms of, as you're saying, quid pro quo, taking some sort of payment for shilling it or having access to the contract address in advance. Are they criminally liable, the KOLs?
I would take a step back, and I don't want to talk about just particularly Kelsier Ventures or whatever, right? I want to talk about the space in general, about a couple of things. First of all, what I realized is that, like, as a space, we value KOLs more than builders. There are more KOLs than builders in the space, right? So I think that's a problem which we have to fix. The number two thing is, I think you should assume that if anybody's shilling anything, they have vested interest in it. Like, nobody needs to say NFA or whatever. I think it should be assumed. And see, like, to be honest, like, we worked with KOLs as well, and is there any insider deal? No, it's like a service for marketing, right? Like broadcasting, right? Like, so I wouldn't like just put everybody in that blanket, right? Like, if a KOL is like informing you about a launch, whatever, that's fair game. But like, if you're hyping it up to that extent and you're talking about like, internet capital markets and all that, that's just bullshit, and I think we need to call it out. Like, there was a lot of grave dancing on Solana's ecosystem the last couple of days. I personally have a lot of respect for Raj and Toli, but I would say one thing I would request them is that, like, I do think that they need to call out the bad actors. I don't think that, like, Solana inherently is like a crime chain or whatever. I don't believe in that narrative. I think it's like, wherever there's economic activity, there's crime. But I do think that, like, the people who are, like, have a voice in the Solana ecosystem, they need to like call out bullshit more. I think we brought this upon ourselves, right? Like, let's go through the narratives, right? Like, there was like the cycle started with the narrative of financial nihilism, right? Like, so what was supposed to happen in it, right? Like, that was literally the first narrative, right? Then somewhere down we had the narrative that, the AGI narrative came in, which is like, okay. Then we had the narrative that, like, it's rotation season, right? Like, it's the daily runner season. Like, basically we are actively saying that, like, you don't believe in it, you're just like trying to, like, come in, like, and that was the narrative. And then it eventually it was like, it's crime season. Yes, like, so we brought it upon ourselves, like, as a as a community. If you think about it, like, like, we all were part of this narrative. Like, to answer your question, I think, see, KOLs are just like the front face. I mean, everybody should have the maturity to, think and say that, like, if anybody's talking about any token, they have a vested interest in it, whether it's a KOL, whether it's not a KOL.
It's refreshing to see not just responding positively to the accountability and the scrutiny, but also taking some ownership of the mistakes that we've made as protocols, as projects, as a community. I think we have fed into the whole financial nihilism narrative a little bit too much, and we've sort of accepted that it is just a casino, and a lot of people have to lose a lot of money. And it's
Forgot about the casino narrative, right? Like, so like the whole casino, there's no crying in the casino, like all of these things were going on, right? So we really brought it upon ourselves, right?
it's not exactly conducive to innovation being adopted, right? It's maybe conducive to the speculation around the innovation, but not necessarily to its adoption and I think the results that we're maybe looking for. Now, in the interest of time, we are sort of running out of time here. So while I have you and while the audience is also listening, what would you like to ask the Enron CEO specific to Kelsier and Hayden and the Enron launch, such that we can bring some clarity to this discussion that we're having today?
I would really like to ask them is that, like, did they direct or were they directed? Did they direct Kelsier, or were they directed by Kelsier in how the launch would be done? Right? I think that is important for us to know, right? Like, and I think that would also address, like, see, in my case, we are not even partners. I never considered it, like, it was a breach of trust from the beginning, right? But I want to know in the Enron case is that, like, a, were they partners, and, like, who was directing this, right? Like, maybe it is like we find out that, like, everything is directed by Kelsier Ventures. So I think that is important for us to know. One last thing I would definitely want to say is that, like, there's retail and there's project. A lot of times we put a lot of blame on the project founders, like it's a rug, and there's a lot of, like, hunting them down, the mob and everything. A lot of the time there are these, like, third parties which are, like, around the projects, which are really like leeches. So this cycle we're seeing that, is in the form of, like, these market makers and Kelsiers. And by the way, like, I don't even think that Kelsier is an exception. You will find out there will be more. So, so, like, these third parties, which is like, market makers or marketing firms, etc. I think we need to do a lot of things to, like, eradicate the need for them. That's basically what the goal of decentralization was, to, like, eradicate the need for these third parties to begin with, right? So I think there is hope, like, for example, in terms of, like, even like marketing and KOLs, I think we can bring in objectivity to things like apps, right? So I think there is, like, things like happening on chain as well. And I think even, like, if we just have, like, a much more robust system, which, coincidentally, which actually Meteora was building, then you don't even need market makers, right? Like, I think Meteora had a really good product. We just didn't have the time and the resources to, like, do everything ourselves. But, I would have, like to do it. So I think what we need to do is, like, get rid of these, like, third parties and build trustless systems. And I think that's what you can discuss with, like, Toli and on as well. But yeah, that's my hope, is, the direction we take.
Thank you. And just sort of going back to something you said quite early on in our conversation, you mentioned that because you're not a meme coin, you had this existing product and all these users and sort of a product market fit to a much higher extent than some of these other launches that Kelsier was involved in, that you sort of fall into a different category. I totally understand that. So to reassure the community that for valid set of reasons are quite concerned, you've had 6 million people use your platform, or 6 million accounts. If I remember correctly, about 500,000 AI agents have been created on the platform. So going forward, how do you rescue that? Is it a hard reset now, or are you going to sort of try and fix things and continue building? What can you tell the community?
We're doing the next version of our launch, and we're going to bring the community back. It's just that, like, do we spend time relaunching V1, or we just launch V2? So we're just going to launch V2. We're going to bring everybody back. And I would just like to end the note so that people understand our vision. The vision is really of internet capital markets. If you think about Pump Fund, it actually enabled that, like, token launching and everything was easy, right? What we believe is that, like, AI is creating a world of abundance, and through the world of abundance will be a lot of creation. So you can actually not just, like, launch a token, but it can be tied to an actual performing asset or an app, so that, the metrics and everything is visible. You can know that, like, okay, this app is doing this much. Then, people can, like, crowdfund it. Like, so that's the way we hope that, like, public goods can be funded, right? So it's a mix of, like, people can build it easily and then they can get the funding for it, right? There needs to be like a bit of self-policing by us, like by a community. We need to, like, learn from our mistakes. We need to own up to our mistakes, and we keep moving forward.
Absolutely. And you said you're bullish on Solana there. Just zooming out for a second, is the bull run over? Is it going to happen? Is there going to be a banana zone? What are your thoughts on price action in the coming 6 to 12 months?
I think there will not be a bull run like what people have been thinking about, like, 2018 and like the previous cycles, because the market is structurally very different now, with like TradFi involvement and everything. I think we will have very similar to like 2024 style, which is like, pockets of bull, then long periods of crabbish, then pockets of bull, right? I think then that's what it will continue. So, like, if people are expecting that we'll have something like a long euphoria cycle of like 6, 7, 8 months, or I don't think that's what's going to happen. But I also don't think there's any reason for, like, the bear market. I do think that, like, there's some self correction happening right now, which is happening in the broader equities market and everything. But yeah, we are neither in a bull market or a bear market, in my view. I think we'll continue like this, and we'll have another leg up after some months of crabbish moment.
Thank you so much for making time to talk to us, for sharing your experience with Hayden and Kelsier Ventures, and bringing some light onto the community's concerns and also your plans going forward. Hopefully we catch up very, very soon, and I hope that the money that they owe you is returned to you guys as quickly as possible as well. Thank you, and catch up soon.
Thanks so much, Jack. It was a pleasure. Take care.